It's a daunting assignment to get up in front of so many heart surgeons and talk about preventive medicine. You remember, preventive medicine was taught at 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, and nobody ever went. And now we're paying the price for that. I think I might start with something from William Osler, who's one of my favorite authorities. He gave the admitting address to the freshmen coming into McGill Medical School, and which time he said, "You're entering a profession that assures you a happy, successful, and contented life. If you fail," he said, "it will be as a person, not as a physician." And yet, I've just been at my 3rd symposium as part of a faculty on Physician Heal Thyself. And what happened? Where did our education fail, you see? I think that's the subject. In as much as we fail, we have failed to provide that kind of advice to our patients. We're born with a 75-year warranty, and nobody ever reads the instructions, you see. It's time we did that. It's time we did that. I think one of the things when I started right for physician and sports medicine, I used to get letters from youngsters who wanted to go into sports medicine. Well, there aren't enough patients to go around in sports medicine. And so it occurred to me the way to practice sports medicine was to treat every patient as if they were an athlete. Then it occurred to me that every patient was an athlete, only some were in training and some weren't. And that's where we are. And unfortunately, in medical school, we didn't learn how to coach athletes. You see, the word doceo comes from Latin meaning to teach. We're really teachers, and we're supposed to teach the good life. That's in Plato, where he talks about the 2 types of doctors. One treats slaves and writes prescriptions, he said, and the other entreats and cajoles and teaches the person how to lead the good life. So that's the question, how to lead the good life. And there are success stories of groups and cultures who have led the good life. And I think that's where we can learn. We have to go back. Remember, Dr. Pereira took over the hypertension clinic at Presbyterian one time. This goes way back. And he said, one of the things he said, if you want to find new birds, you have to go down old roads. I think if you want to find new things, you ought to go back and find things that have been discarded. And the talk tonight is pretty much about that. It's about the 3 things that are so important in every successful group of people, and they are primarily exercise, diet, and stress management. Wherever you see a successful group and look closely, you'll find there is exercise, diet, and stress management. Yet, one of the reasons we have these sessions of Physician Heal Thyself is that we never learned anything about exercise. Exercise physiology is not taught in medical school. So we're self-taught, and a lot of what we've taught is either wrong or unnecessary, and for the most part, we simply stonewall our way out of it. I remember when I was a resident in Kings County Hospital, I had the diabetic ward. I never could get anybody to cover me. They didn't want to see a real live diabetic. And I think when people come in and talk to us about exercise, we tend to have the same sort of thing. We just rather not talk about it and make inconsequential advice. The second thing is diet, and Dr. Kotke today said he didn't think you should needed a PhD to advise people on diet. I think you do. And primarily because the manufacturers keep fooling us, you see. You have to learn how to shop in a supermarket. And I think that's possibly the most dangerous spot in town right now is a supermarket. And the one rule in the supermarket is don't go in the aisles. Never go in the aisles. And particularly, I think it's aisle 7. I'm not sure. I think all the goodies are in there. But what you do is you go around the perimeter. So you have the, as Dr. Kotke showed in his slides, you see you have the vegetables, fruit, and then fish, meat, lean meat, then dairy, no fat dairy, and finally beer. And then fill your thing and get out. And then stress management. So as physicians, we didn't know enough about diet, and I think we're clear evidence, daily evidence that we don't know how to handle stress. So there it is. Now tonight, what I'd like to do, I can't fill in everything, you see. This is kind of like Life 101. We spent most of our time learning how to make a living, and we haven't learned how to live. So we'll start tonight on that. And I thought we'd start with exercise and what we should know. Fortunately, you don't have to know much. You don't have to know much. The first thing we should know is that we use exercise for at least 2 reasons, maybe 3, now that Dean Ornish has convinced some people that we can reverse coronary disease. The first reason we use it is for performance. I think we'll show this first overhead, if we can find out. There we go. We use exercise for performance, which is, we call it fitness. It's the ability to do submaximal work to exhaustion. And in that respect, what we have to learn is exercise physiology, which is the science of human performance. What we're developing here is a property of muscle, the same as strength or speed or coordination. So the focus in fitness is on the muscle cell itself, not on the heart or lungs. As far as fitness is concerned, and we get into exercise, we're not going to change lung function. Your lungs are, everybody in this room has a great pair of lungs as far as I'm concerned. And you have a reasonably good heart. You just have a lousy body. That's the problem. The muscle is the problem. And the reason you get shorter breath and your pulse goes up is because your muscle needs so many gallons of blood. You see, you're like a Rolls Royce. You're getting about 4 miles on a gallon. And what you want to do is get up to where, like my Honda Civic, where I can get 400 miles on a tank. See? Now, most of us think we're pretty big stuff because we take care of the heart, which we suppose is the motor of the body. Most people think of the heart as the motor of the body. It's not. You know, Vance Packard once said that, I don't know where, cardiologists were like 4-star admirals. I don't know where that puts heart surgeons. There. Like Norm Schwarzkopf didn't get his 5th star, but heart surgeons have them automatically. And so, but, you know, 4-star admirals take care of important things. And actually, all the heart is a fuel pump. It takes oxygen from the gas tank. That shows you how important your lungs are. Yeah. So, because that doesn't determine how many miles you get per gallon. And nutrients from the gut, still potential enemy, chemical energy. Takes it to the motor cell. That's the muscle, and the muscle is the motor. And so when we get into an exercise program, that's where the changes are. You can take a biopsy day 1, the end of 3 months, and miracles have occurred where? At the muscle level. 300 to 400% increase in capillary density, increase in the mitochondria, myoglobin, all the enzymes. And they've demonstrated how important these mitochondria are. You can take superbly trained rats and just knock out their mitochondria, leave their heart, lungs, and vasculature intact, and they have no more endurance. So endurance resides in the muscle. So that's the first thing we should know. We're going to focus on the muscle, and the next thing you've got to know is that the body knows what it's doing. Well, people have been getting fit since the 5th century BC by just using the body as the monitor. I remember a note in the British Medical Journal said the body has information that's technologically inaccessible. You know, you go through the exhibit there, you wouldn't believe that that's possible. You need at least $25,000 worth of equipment to find out what's going on inside. Yet, here is your body announcing to you what's going on. The problem with the body is it doesn't speak English. You know, it records sensations that you have to interpret. And this is the Borg scale, which we all know about, but you go from very, very light, light, to comfortable, somewhat hard, very hard, very hard. The training pace is comfortable. That's all you have to do, be comfortable. Now, when you start this, and in our clinic, we found that the people will say they're comfortable. I'm comfortable, you know. They lie. They lie, and it's a part of the culture, no pain, no gain, that sort of thing. But comfortable is all you have to be. I live on a boardwalk, and I see people running by, and it looks like they can't make it to the next block, you know. And I feel like going out and saying, no, that's not the way you do it. You're supposed to, the only time you're supposed to look like that is when you have a number here. That's when you have that. People think they can't get fit without having some discomfort. It's not true. So comfortable is it. Now you go to the exercise physiologist, and they'll tell you then whatever you want to do. What are we looking for? We're looking for fitness, the ability to do work, submaximal work to exhaustion. What we're looking for then is to fill the day with happy, healthy, productive activity. How do we do it? You go to the physiologist, and innumerable physiologists have earned their masters and even doctorates proving that 9-year-old boys or 90-year-old women and everybody in between, and whether you have heart disease or lung disease or on dialysis, will get fit doing 30 minutes at a comfortable pace 4 times a week. That's all there is to fitness. You can put on a 3x5 index card. The physiology you can put on a head of a pin. The question is, what will they do? Now, we have a recidivism rate that's the same as cocaine addiction. 70% of people put the gear in their closet and leave it there. Now you have to earn your keep. Up to here, it's easy. Now you've got to be a doctor again. You've got to be a coach. You've got to look at this individual and decide what do they like to do. Generally, people are divided into 3 groups. And when you look at them, you can tell whether they're made for fight, flight, or negotiation. Now, their sport, their play, their way they handle stress is related to that. It's related to their body build, and their body build, in a sense, reflects their personality. You have a person like me, and you know that I'm not made for contact sports. You know, what was it? Vince Lombardi said that dancing was a contact sport. Football was a collision sport. You know, now. But people come in that are collision people. They're hitters, rather sizable wrist. You can tell looking at them what they like. And those people will be bored to tears walking or jogging or something like that. They need something that creates some tension and something that lets their muscles speak, so they get into hitting sports, racket sports, karate, weightlifting. My son lives next to a fellow who plays rugby. He's about 39. He's coming home kind of bruised up but tipsy. You know how they are. And he said to him, what are you going to do when you can't play rugby? He said, I don't know. He said, I'd play tennis if about every 4th game I could jump over the net and beat the crap out of the other guy. You introduce that fellow to a jogging program, you lost him. You see. What they do shouldn't be the phys ed they hated when they're in school. It has to be what you sat in class wanting to do when you were finished. I think that's the beauty of this. We live in a renaissance now where you can do anything you want to do and you're having your consciousness elevated to what you can do. Now look, there's a whole cornucopia of things you can do. Walking, swimming, cycling, jogging, dancing, all kinds of dancing, racket sports. And maybe things you never thought of doing. Fencing, for instance. Roller skating, they got these new roller skating. But the point is, I think it has to be fun. It has to be something we do even if it wasn't good for them. Now, it's true, there are people that have a gun in their ribs. Most of the people that you will operate on have had some serious incident that's centered their attention. And they're willing to do something that's dull and boring and mindless in order to get the effects of it. But say, I'm a runner, and I say, well, we're looking at here as a generic drug is exercise. You've got to find your brand, just as you find your brand of everything else, from shaving cream to boiled ham. I mean, there's something out there that you like to do. There should be, or else you've been cheated. But they have to find the kid in you, see. So let's see. The other thing that we should, we understand what we're doing here has nothing to do with their heart. This part of exercise simply has to do with them as a person and as an athlete. I think you have to look at everybody that comes in your office, look over the desk and see an athlete. What's their event? You know, their event is today. Today is the big event. It's getting up and knowing what kind of a day you're going to have. Most cardiacs are finished by mid-afternoon. So I think what we have to understand is that we are using exercise in this instance simply to improve them functionally, regardless of whether they have heart disease. Cardiac rehab is too valuable to be limited to cardiacs. It looks like every American, or half of Americans, should be in cardiac rehab right now. The average American now is 30 years older physiologically than they are chronologically. That means that 50% of the people who come in your office are already 30 years older than they ought to be. Many of them look it, you know? So when we now know, because of competition, that the world's record at the age of 40 is within 5% of the world's record, at 50 it's within 10%, at 60 within 15%. Now you say, well, I don't treat those kind of people. Those are their motor geniuses. No, I'm talking about everybody that comes in, their world's record, what they could have done when they were 28. 28 being the peak. If you weren't here right now, you could be watching Michael Jackson, age 28, at his peak. So that means that you can come, and you too can come within 5% of what you could have done when you're 28, simply through exercise. At 50, within 10%, at 60, within 15%. And I was in a group in St. Louis when I was 60 that was exactly right. That in 40 years since I graduated, I ran cross country at Manhattan College. In the 40 years, I only lost 15% of my maximum oxygen uptake. So that we should understand the possibilities of the people in front of it. William James, back in 1906, gave a talk on the energies of man. And that night he said, we live lives inferior to ourselves. The people that we're treating are living lives inferior to themselves. They can do so much more. And it wasn't until this whole fitness thing came up that we could see what was possible for people. You know, what I like to talk about this is life expectancy, not longevity. We'll get to longevity. No, life expectancy. What do you expect today? What kind of a day is this going to be? Back in 1910, Arnold Bennett wrote a book called How to Live on 24 Hours a Day. That's the budget. That's all anybody gets. That's what your patients get. This budget is 24 hours, 8 hours to sleep, 16 hours. And in that 16 hours, you have to work out your professional success, your domestic bliss, and the salvation of your soul. And these people are in a semi-coma at 7 o'clock at night. You know, I'm in my philosophical puberty, but one thing I'm sure, I wasn't sent here just to make a living. And that's what most people are doing. They're getting through, and they spend the rest of the day recuperating and go back to work. When I started running 25 years ago, I doubled my life expectancy. The end of my work became the beginning of my day. Now I have an avocation, you see. I spent that 8 hours as the Greeks did in creating a self. That was their whole idea. Their word for leisure was skole. They went to school and they made themselves a work of art and then put that in a life that was a work of art. I think we have to look higher than just survival. I wrote an article in the Physician Sports Medicine this month. It's about Dr. Barsky up in Boston saying, why are our patients dissatisfied? And with all the great stuff we're doing and all this high tech, why are they dissatisfied? And I think the reason is that they're not just interested in survival. They're interested in success. See? And when we're looking at success, exercise is absolutely essential. To be put in a successful day. Forget about a successful life. I mean, right now, even in this room, I don't know how many people are concerned about their lifespan beside me. You know? If you are, you're wasting your time. So most people are concerned simply with what kind of a day they're going to have, and that's the reason we should be using exercise. That's where you grade it that way. One thing, gender is no excuse, of course. You go in a race now, you're quite likely to be beaten by thousands of women. I remember the first woman that went by me in the race. I went berserk, absolute berserk. spittle coming out, thrashing right by her, put her. And then she just motored past me, you know. So I gradually began to accept the fact that women are really good athletes and as good as us. And neither is disease. This is one of our problems, is that we restrict patients and therefore make them unfit and then create a handicap. People are not usually handicapped because of their disease. They're handicapped because they're unfit. So every patient that comes in should be on some kind of an exercise program because there's so much of physiology available to them. They get younger, they do more. And finally, about using exercise, you should realize that there is such a thing as a second wind. As we're sitting or doing nothing here, only about 20% of your blood is going to your muscles. 25 or more going to your kidneys. Similar amount probably going to your gut. Perfectly useless when you start in movement. So it takes a while, though, to shunt that into your muscles, usually until you raise your temperature about 1 degree. Now, for world-class runners, they do it in 3 minutes. Good runners do it in 6 minutes. Most people take 10, 12 minutes before they get into equilibrium. And it's in that first 8 or 10 minutes is when you're going to get discomfort. And so these runners are going to delude you. They're going to have run-through angina, just as Al Caddis described walk-through angina about 15 years ago. They'll get angina that first few minutes, and then they'll stop and walk, and then they'll run 5 miles. And I hear that repeatedly. That's what Jim Fix had. He was getting discomfort early on, and then he'd get through it. Most of those people, fortunately, anyway, my runners usually have one vessel disease because every time they go out, it's a stress test. So when they hear, they usually only have one vessel. A sedentary individual will have 3. So that second wind is important because it's in there that you're going to get the symptoms. Now, by the same token, it makes stress tests dangerous because you'll take somebody and do a bulky on them and walk them that first 6 minutes, get them through into that second wind, then you're not going to get a positive test. And that happens. I have a friend, Ralph Oricello, up in my town, up in New Jersey, and what he does with these runners, he puts them on the mill, gives them the controls, and said, show me what you're talking about. I mean, you got to throw away the protocol on some of these people and push them quickly so they're going to get that symptom before they get into the second wind. Now, we get people fit. Now, this is one of the problems. We get people into an exercise program, we get them fit, and then they go out and develop coronary disease. And then everybody looks at you and says, well, see, running is dangerous. It really isn't good for you. They don't take into account what we've done for this individual's life. And then you don't understand how it can be then that someone that you've gotten fit will then go out and have a heart attack. Last year, I went up to the Connecticut Academy of General Practice, and when I was leaving, a fellow came off the boardwalk, wheeling a bike, ashen, pain in his chest, sure enough had a heart attack. He developed that. He'd been riding his bike 10 miles every day for the past 2 years on the boardwalk. He was pissed, I want to tell you. How could that happen? How could this happen to Jim Fix? What's going on? I think that's the reason. What we have to see is that we're dealing now in preventing unnecessary illness and premature death, and there we're concerned with metabolism. We keep thinking we're aiming this at the heart. We're aiming it at their arteries. Osler said a man is as old as his arteries. That's what we're trying to. We're concerned with metabolism because it's wrecking people's arteries. So when you keep focusing on the heart, see, when actually in fitness it's in the legs, and in health it's the arteries. We want to keep those arteries clean. If you look at those coronary risk factors, cholesterol, obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, all has to do with fat metabolism. Fat's the enemy. Fat is the enemy. You got to declare war on fat. And that's where we have to teach the troops. When I think of the doctor, the docio, the teacher, it's like you're the head coach. Now you need assistant coaches. You know, you've got to teach the squad fundamentals. Well, the fundamentals are exercise, diet, and stress management. Well, you need an assistant coach to have to do with exercise, another assistant coach called a dietitian for your diet thing, and maybe maybe a member of the clergy for stress management. But I think we have to see, as Dr. Kotke's talking about today, that we're in charge, but we can't do everything. And especially we can't do things that we don't know too much about. But if fat is the enemy, then you're going to find out you're living in occupied territory. You walk out there and there's fat all over. Places landmined and booby-trapped with fat. You get so that you can become obnoxious in a way. I ride the planes a lot, and Americans the only one with skim milk. You know, the others give you that in-between stuff. Or worse, they give you that creamer. And there's not too many hotels that you can get the skim milk. Sometimes when they don't have skim milk, I say, sit me in smoking. You know, I want to make a point here. Fat is important. So we prevent access, and I like the American Heart Association diet because it's simple. It doesn't have any recipes. Men don't like recipes. And besides, it doesn't have any portions, like what's 3 ounces of anything look like? We don't know that. And then we have to burn up the excess. And here's the problem, because when you're burning up the excess, you may have what, for want of another word, is a sluggish metabolism. Now the 2 hours that make you fit, you might need 4 or 5 to lose weight, bring your blood pressure down, change your diabetes, you see. But it'll do it. You know, the Pima Indians have some chant. They say that we're running away from diabetes, you know. So we can do it. We can change these things, but we have to make the diet-exercise connection. We have to understand the difference between fitness and health. See, Ken Cooper started most of this revolution when America took this 180-degree turn in 1968. But it wasn't until last year he published Controlling Cholesterol. In the New York Times, it said, the man who made you fit is now going to make you healthy. If you understand that, that will go a long way to understanding where you're successful and where you're not. Now, see the next one. We were talking about how much you had to know about nutrition. Well, I learned this in 1941 in a little medical school in Brooklyn that has disappeared, or has now become downstate. But in 41, things were not complicated. I don't remember us eating out, my family eating out, ever. And everything was prepared at home, and we didn't have the problem, you see. And so we didn't have to read labels like to get the 30%. I just want to remind you that a gram of fat is 9 calories, and only 3% is utilized by the body in depositing it for fuel source. So it's really 9 calories, whereas protein, 50% is destroyed, so it's only 2 calories, and carbohydrates only 3. So where it looks like it's 30%, 1 gram, 1 gram, 1 gram, actually it's over 60%. Over the end, you see speed and endurance, and I think that's important. When we start elevating the intensity, we change the fuel, and we introduce more and more carbohydrate into the fuel mixture, which is unnecessary. And we want to burn up fat, so the way to burn up fat is with endurance. Marathoners know this, because when we hit the wall at 20 miles, it's because we have no more sugar in our body, no more glycogen, and you're running completely on fat, and that's a pretty slow trot. You get down to about 50%. So you can get fit with a smile on your face, and you can get healthy with a smile. You don't need to elevate your intensity. I just mentioned diet-exercise connection because Pritikin was the one that made that, and now Dean Ornish is following up on him. And we think of Pritikin as a pioneer, but actually is preceded by some great names like Hippocrates, Maimonides, William Osler. Osler in 1900, a great quote, he said, coronary disease is a nemesis that nature inflicts upon us for breaking her rules. You know, then once again we get back to the rules, which we were never taught. We've got to get back and find out what the rules are. And we find the rules, I think, by, as I say, by looking at successful groups. But I'm going to skip cholesterol because you all know about that. Those are the Framingham figures, incidentally, not the NIH, 180. On the bottom there is clotting, and I think this is important because we do get people that, we get their risk factors within reason, but you're not don't feel that happy with them. And I think that there's pretty clear evidence that there's a clotting factor, to the extent that I know up in Framingham now they're using a fibrinogen as part of the risk thing. And if we're looking at clotting, exercise has fibrinolytic activity, excellent fibrinolytic. But then there's the 2 fish meals a week. I see we had salmon tonight, that was good. 2 drinks a day, and a half an aspirin. I have a hiatus hernia, so that eliminates the aspirin. And my wife feels that she can't cook fish well, so I'm reduced to having 2 beers every night. In fact, if I get to bed and realize I've skipped my 2 prophylactic beers, I remedy it. I get up and take care of that. When I was at Kings County, I remember one of the attendings told me, he said, alcoholics have the arteries of a baby. Of course, the lifespan was diminished, but even so, there is something to alcohol. And the Kaiser Permanente study, of 100,000 people showed that they had 2 drink-a-day people had half the coronary admissions. So I think where you get somebody, say, has a low HDL, I got this kind of sneaky feeling that a low HDL has something to do with clotting, that you introduce him to one of those 4 methods. I'm not sure if you use all 4 that you'll bleed to death, but you want to, maybe 2 of those. Huh? All right, so let's see now. What do we got next? Oh, okay. So then we have this thing about diet, exercise, and stress management. Again, Osler, he said Greek medicine consisted of science, gymnastics, and theology. Not to forget this, science, gymnastics. Actually, the word in Greek is diet, which has to do with regimen, exercise, and food. So it's lifestyle. It's really science, lifestyle, and theology. We might think about that a little. But the lessons from the Stone Age, if you read Melvin Connor and that group out of Atlanta on the Paleolithic prescription, he thinks we all should do that. They think we should do that. The gene pool hasn't changed that much, He's an anthropologist, tick of the evolutionary clock since they were out hunting dinosaurs. We were out hunting dinosaurs, And what did they have? Well, they only had 2 food groups. They had vegetables, fruit, and game and fish. 2 food groups, no dairy. It begins to look as if dairy was introduced into the food groups by the Wisconsin Dairy Council. I remember when I was back in this little school in Brooklyn that our professor of biochemistry said milk was the perfect food for young mammals, but that's it. So we have to remove the animal fat from milk. That's at a minimum. And the wild game, of course, had all the unsaturated omega-3. It was low fat to begin with. My boss was Bill Dock, and he said you should only eat working animals. Which is almost the same, because you can't go out and here you can, I guess, shoot bison and things that are... I mean, you can eat wild game up here, but we don't do that in the East. As far as exercise, the caveman was relatively big. They were about 5'10", big bone, well-muscled. Well, it wasn't when we got into an agricultural thing, introduced grains, then people got small. If you've ever been on the Mayflower, you'd find out. You almost have to get on your hands and knees to go through the doors. Alcohol was infrequent. They had no tobacco. They had a very strong social family network, tribal, and they danced a lot. I don't know how Connor knows that, but they seem to be able to figure out things. Now, here's another group. I left this slide home, so I had to make it up again. But this is the Alameda 7, which is a standby of everybody in preventive medicine. It's a study by the Breslows done in 1972 in Alameda County, a large group of happy, healthy, productive people. 7 rules and exercise. Every time you pick up anything, there's a thing in the British Medical Journal last month about 16 85-year-old physicians that were interviewed. All of them were athletes. Some had smoked and smoked heavily till they were 50 and stopped, and they're fine. All of them drank. One said he was an alcoholic. So we need to see this exercise can cover, it's like charity, it covers a multitude of sins. Exercise regularly. They ate a good breakfast. We don't know why. Don't eat between meals. They maintain weight. And I think this is an important thing for us because we're geared into metropolitan life type stuff where you're 40, take 5, you're 50, another 5. I think that's ridiculous. Nature doesn't change its rules because you're 40 or 50 or 60 or 70. I want my stats to be the same as they were when I was 20. And I think that's what everybody, your blood pressure. You know, Bill Castelli is now up at Framingham. He said, know your numbers, know your numbers. It would be great if we knew our numbers when we were 20 and try to keep them that way. And I think mainly this is what they're talking about here in maintaining weight. They had 2 rules about having fun. They didn't smoke. And I think the war against smoking has been won. The people that are still smoking are, for the most part, probably don't want to. The young people coming up, I don't know, but Everett Koop, now for instance, if you think that it appears to you that more young women are smoking than young men, you're right, because they are. And Everett Koop is one of these very direct kind of guys, and he's done his own kind of survey, and he goes up and he asks every young woman that's smoking why they're doing it, and they tell him to lose weight. I think there are better ways to lose weight, but it shows that we can do something about that. And of course, they drank moderately, and they got a good night's sleep. What's interesting about this, it seems to me, is that if you treat everybody as an athlete and you get people exercising, the Center for Disease Control, incidentally, one time took running as a drug and to see what it would do for smoking and for weight loss. And they decided it was the absolute best thing in the literature for accomplishing both of those objects. But once you get into an exercise program, all these things happen. The exercise body doesn't want to smoke. In a study in the Chicago race, a large fields like 5,000 people, they found that 70% of the runners had never smoked, but of the other 30%, now only 1 in 6. Most running stats show about 3 to 5% are smoking. I have a feeling that that's almost not reducible. Wall Street Journal had a thing recently about 400 cardiologists and only 3% smoke. Now, why did that 3% smoke? They're really hardcore people, and they have problems. Anyway, the exercising body does all these things. It doesn't want to smoke. It likes to drink, I found it, and it sleeps well. So when you have someone come in, you've got this athlete, what I think the best thing to do is say, we'll take care of your smoking in time, and don't worry about the 6 beers you're putting away and that you're only getting 4 hours sleep a night. Just let's get on this exercise program. And I think the exercising body has a mind of its own, and you begin to get into this program. Now, one of the most interesting studies that I've seen on lifestyle and specifically exercise, diet, and stress management is the Mormon High Priest study, and it was in the National Cancer Institute journal a year ago, December. This was a study of almost 5,000 Mormon priests, and they're not priests, incidentally. Well, I know there's several in the room. There always are. I've done a lot of, I love the Mormons, but they want me to be a Mormon. That's we have a little disagreement there. But so the result here, first of all, they're Mormons. So you look at that, their Mormon life, no drugs, caffeine, alcohol, balanced diet, strong family life, education, and weekly church going should have been in there. I don't know how it slipped up. But special to this group was that they exercised regularly, they didn't smoke, they got a good night's sleep, and 99% were married. Now, all of these health-interested religions have good stats for cancer, all-cause mortality, and cardiac mortality, but this group was phenomenal. Their cancer rate on the standard mortality rate was 36% of the national average. Their heart attack rate was 12%. It's incredible to me, but there they were. And the fellow that did this work is a certified guy. He's done a lot of good stuff. Now, what's going on here? What should we know? Well, again, it seems to me we see what the effect of regular exercise, not smoking, and then the sleep. this Alameda study of the good night's sleep was reported, was reported again out of Wisconsin, and this 8-hour sleep became important. Under 6 hours, people didn't do well, and over 9. But what appears to me here is that stress management involves being a Mormon, and being religious, being married, being in this stable network, and it becomes this combination of exercise. They're not quite vegetarians, but they're on good diets, and then the stress management that involves their entire psychosocial milieu. You don't have to be a Mormon for this, you see. If you read William James' Varieties of Religious Experience, there's a generic religion just as there's a generic exercise. So Mormon is one brand, but there's many brands outside that will give us the same result if we follow that kind of lifestyle. Now, finally, I want to kind of bring this all together for us as physicians. When the patient comes in the office, there's 3 components to this sickness. We frequently see, it's almost like poetry, you know, you read a poem at a certain level, and then there's another level, and there are further levels that maybe we don't get to. And primarily, you see, we're concerned with this first panel, the disease panel. In diseases, it has to do with pathology. There are structural changes. It's a biological event. You can do an angio and you can see the blockage, or you can do a biopsy and see cirrhosis, or, you know, there's a variety of ways we can show the changes in structure that occurs with disease. Usually it involves one organ. My father was a physician. He used to say, God is good. He only gives you one disease, you know, heart disease or kidney disease or lung disease. And we're primarily concerned with curing this disease because it has to do with longevity, and we do the treating. The patient really doesn't do very much about this. The patient is like the battleground, and we engage in battle with the disease. And in here, that's the way we look at it. We're primarily concerned with one of those inalienable rights, which we would say was life. Actually, as we can see, those inalienable rights have associated obligations and duties. People don't get their allotted 75-year-old lifespan if they don't cooperate in some way. The second thing, however, is the illness. Now, the illness is different from the disease. You have a patient with coronary disease, the illness is presumably the impact the disease has on the individual's life. Because I have coronary disease, I can't walk to the end of this room, I can't hold a job, I don't have sex with my wife, I'm on 8 different kinds of medication, etc. Now that, you would say, would be the illness, but what we're beginning to see is that that isn't due to the coronary disease. You see, that's due to the fact that they're functioning poorly, because Terry Cavanaugh has marathoners who have 2 and 3 vessel disease, and then we have other people who are completely disabled because they are not physiologically fit. And they're part of that group that is 30 years older than they ought to be. And so illness has to do with physiology. And it's correctable, see? It's correctable without making one change in the pathology. We can deal with the physiology. And here it's the whole body that we're treating, and we're coping, and here we become teachers because the patient has to do this. We can't exercise for the patient. We can't diet for the patient. We can't do other things for the patient. And as I said, this is life expectancy. And actually here, the right that patients and we feel we have is liberty to do what we want to do when we want to do it. Well, if you don't have self-mastery, if you don't have, if you haven't gotten yourself informed, so to speak, you give up on your liberty. And finally, you see, is the third thing the patient brings in, and this is the one we really don't want to hear about, and that's the predicament. That's the situation, the psychosocial situation they're in, and here we're dealing with the entire person. Molière once said that life was a play with a badly written third act. And our waiting rooms are filled with people who are in the middle of a badly written third act. And we have to deal with that. See? This has to do with counseling and primarily dealing with happiness. We have unhappy people. That's when this proceeds from the disease. You have someone with coronary disease, then you have a completely unfit individual, then in a domestic employment, personal situation, we're dealing with unhappy people. And that's the third right, the pursuit of happiness. So how do we go about this? I think Schumacher is the one that's written best about this. It's about the problems we face, that the important problems in life are solved only by death. Like raising a child or living with another person, You think you've settled it, and then you wake up in the morning and there it is again. It's never resolved. He talks about convergent problems like putting a man on the moon. That's simple. But where you're dealing with opposing goods, you're continually going from one side to the other. That's where the predicament is. And the person, says Schumacher, has to grow. So we have to help this person somehow grow in order to deal with what life brings. And it's in that area, I think, that we should realize that how much an exercise program has to do. Not only that, but you can see, when you look at the Mormon or the religious part, you can see handling the predicament and stress and the stress is mostly in that panel. What I found from exercise is that unfortunately, or perhaps because that's the way it occurred, running and the exercise became a life of its own, so to speak. I remember Jim Fixx had a story in his book, The Complete Runner, where he met some woman and he asked her about her husband, and she said, well, Ted used to be a Methodist, now he's a runner. And I think that that in a way expresses that you find this self through becoming an athlete. Not necessarily, but I think it's a good start. But always looking to all those other ways that we can help stress. Most of the things we advise for stress are only first aid. Now, I get under stress, I can get suited up and go out on the road. I've never been mad at anybody. 25 years running out there, I've never been mad at anything. But the next day, somebody upsets me, I have to go out again. So it's like taking an aspirin or so. What you have to do is change the individual. If we look at life as a play, and you're thinking about plays, how do you change plays? Hamlet's not going to change unless Hamlet changes. There'll still be all those bodies lying around. And Macbeth's the same. He's got to get rid of his greed. Othello, he remains jealous. That play's going to come out just the same as it always was. So these people have to change. And I think that's the challenge for us, is to bring things into their life, looking back at these successful groups and say, what can we bring into this individual's life? Besides getting them not to smoke and do all that other kind of stuff and learn how to shop in supermarkets, but actually making a change in their social support network and in their own self-image. So that's that key there. And I think you can say, well, running, how is that going to do it when they've got to make this absolute major change? To get what James calls the assurance state. That's what happens in religion. You make a connection with a higher power and then you're saved. But I think we can help through exercise as a byproduct, that you take an individual and change them. If this was a room of runners, all runners, I would know that there was a story for everybody in the room before they started running and now, and the changes that occurred. And mostly that is in the way you feel about yourself. And that's the important thing in the pursuit, you see. The whole goal of psychotherapy is to revise self-image. Now, you can revise that self-image by accepting a spiritual view of yourself and the world. That would be the best way. But you can also do it by changing yourself physically or mentally or in other ways. So what am I saying is that I think we have to go back then and look at treating the individual totally, not only the disease, and we have such marvelous scientific ways now to handle this pathology, organ structure, but also the illness, learning how to use exercise and learning how to use other lifestyle changes to minimize the illness, so that in effect you can get a patient with heart disease who is probably more energetic and more productive than his presumably healthy neighbor. And also to understand the predicament. When we take a history, it should include all three panels, and frequently we miss out completely on what's going on in this individual's life. We don't even know they're unhappy, you see, and to find out what we can do about that. Where we find these things, I think, is by going back to those giants. We stand on the shoulders of giants to find out what worked in all these successful groups, and to see that no matter how we use it, it will always come down to exercise, diet, and stress management, and learning how to use these things, and therefore bringing our patients and ourselves to that kind of success that we felt we were going to attain when we entered medical school that very first day. Thank you very much for listening.
I want to thank you for a delightful talk. I do have one question. Our colleagues in addiction medicine tell us that we get addicted to a number of things, drugs and alcohol, of course, and then other things like food, work, sex, and then exercise. What do you think about the latter?
About addiction to exercise?
Right.
Yeah. I was thinking of Land. You know, Land, he invented the Polaroid camera. And I was at a lecture one time that he spoke, and he was saying how he had to do an experiment every day. He was addicted to these experiments, and that he got this fantastic feeling. You know, when he described it, was what Abe Maslow described as peak experiences. I think what that meant to me is that there are positive addictions. You know, what happens when you exercise is that this isn't a fraud. You know, you take crack and you have this feeling that makes you think you're the greatest in the entire world, and that you're brilliant. I remember when I used to get drunk, I was wishing people would take down what I was saying because it was so. Then my brother-in-law took 50 feet of film of me, and it turned out that I was the missing link. Now, running is a positive addiction. What it does is all positive, has positive effects. And so I look at it as something that we need. That's the sort of an addiction we need to do things that are good for us. So. Whereas these other addictions tear you down, and they really give you a false picture of what you are, whereas you are what you think when you're a runner. I was thinking of one thing that Maslow said. I usually use it, but I didn't use it tonight, and it was that he said the problem with healthcare specialists is all they ever look at are losers. You know, he said, well, we should be looking at the gold medalists. We see what human beings can do and be, and that's what I tried to talk about tonight. The successes. These are the gold medalists that I was talking about.